Let's try one more example where I give you a quadratic equation that's in that kind of standard form for solving, and we swap that over into a quadratic equation that's in standard form for graphing. So here's our g of x. G of x is equal to negative 4x squared plus 8x minus 5, and I want you to express g of x in standard form for graphing. Here's what we're going to do first. Let's take a look at those 7 steps that we talk about in the notes that I have for you. And the first step tells us to do the following. It tells us to group together our x squared and our x terms. So for step 1, we're going to rewrite this as g of x is equal to negative 4x squared plus 8x, and bring our minus 5 over there. Right. Now step 2 tells us to factor out the coefficient of x squared. So there is a coefficient in front of x squared, and when we factor it out of x squared, we have to factor it out of x as well. So remember that factoring out means it's the same thing as dividing by. So when I divide negative 4x squared by negative 4, I'm left with x squared. When I divide 8x by negative 4, I'm left with negative 2x. Okay, so step 3 says divide the new coefficient of x by 2. Take a look at our coefficient of x. We have a negative 2 over there. So negative 2 divided by 2 gives us negative 1. And then step 4 tells us to square that number. So square the number from step 3. So negative 1 squared is the same thing as saying 1. Step 5 tells us to add the result of step 4 inside the parentheses. So we're going to go back to our function g of x, and we're going to rewrite this. And that 1 that we found from over there, we're going to stick it in the parentheses over here. Now we can't just add a 1 to the inside of a function without doing something to balance it out. And that's where step 6 comes in. Step 6 says to take the number from step 4 times the coefficient in front of the parentheses and subtract it from outside the parentheses. So this is the same thing as saying, okay, so that 1 that we just input over there, we're going to multiply it by that negative 4, which we have over there. And we're going to subtract that. Oh, sorry. Okay, we're going to subtract that from the product of negative 4 and 1. Okay, so what this does is this gives us minus 5. So we have minus negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And don't forget that anytime you have subtracting a negative, it's the same thing as adding. So this becomes this. Negative 5 plus 4, and that's the same thing as saying negative 4 times x squared minus 2x plus 1. Negative 5 plus 4 is the same thing as saying negative 1. And the last thing we have to do is step 7, and step 7 tells us whatever we have in the set of parentheses there, we have to factor that completely as a perfect square. So I want you to think about how we can factor x squared minus 2x plus 1. Can we think of 2 numbers that multiply out to 1 and sum up to negative 2? And those 2 numbers are going to be negative 1 and negative 1. So I can rewrite this like this. But again, remember that standard form is x minus something squared. And so we can rewrite that as x minus 1 squared minus 1. So this is the equivalent form of the original equation that we started with. Just one is in a kind of standard form for solving, which we have over here. And this one is in what I like to call the standard form for graphing. So here's our answer over here.